The morning sky over Windsor Castle appeared deceptively calm as Senior Guard Captain Robert Harrison began his final inspection of the perimeter. After 18 years of dedicated service, he had developed an almost supernatural ability to read the weather patterns that swept across the English countryside. Today, however, something felt different in the air. Though he couldn't quite put his finger on what was troubling him, Robert had always been known among his fellow guards for his meticulous attention to detail and his unwavering commitment to protocol. His uniform was pressed to perfection, his boots polished to a mirror shine, and his ceremonial sword positioned at exactly the regulation angle. These details mattered to him not just as matters of professional pride, but as expressions of his deep respect for the institution he served and the history he helped preserve. The castle grounds were bustling with activity as preparations continued for the annual garden party scheduled for the following afternoon. Hundreds of guests were expected, including diplomats, charity leaders, and distinguished citizens from across the Commonwealth. The event represented months of careful planning, and Robert felt the weight of responsibility that came with ensuring the security and smooth operation of such a significant occasion. His radio crackled with routine communications from the security control room. Weather reports indicated partly cloudy skies with light winds, nothing that would interfere with the outdoor celebration. The meteorological service had been monitoring conditions closely, given the importance of the event, and their forecasts showed no cause for concern. Robert acknowledged the reports, but found himself scanning the horizon with growing unease. Margaret Thompson, the head of protocol, approached Robert near the Rose Garden, where much of the next day's festivities would take place. She had worked with him on dozens of similar events over the years, and their professional relationship had evolved into one of mutual respect and trust. Her questions about security arrangements were thorough but friendly, reflecting her own dedication to ensuring every detail was perfectly executed. The conversation turned to contingency plans, as it always did before major events. Robert reviewed the procedures for various scenarios, from medical emergencies to security threats, but Margaret noticed something in his demeanor that suggested deeper concerns. When she asked about weather contingencies, Robert paused longer than usual before responding, his eyes once again drawn to the distant sky. Teams of groundskeepers were putting finishing touches on the carefully manicured lawns and flower beds that would serve as the backdrop for tomorrow's gathering. Their work represented weeks of preparation, and Robert appreciated their dedication to excellence. The gardens looked magnificent, with every blade of grass trimmed to perfection and every flower arranged with artistic precision. Catering staff were conducting their final preparations in the temporary kitchens that had been erected for the occasion. The logistics of feeding hundreds of guests while maintaining the highest standards of quality and safety required extraordinary coordination. Robert had worked closely with the catering manager to ensure that security protocols were integrated seamlessly with food service operations. The Queen's private secretary arrived to review the final schedule with Robert and Margaret. Her Majesty's movements during the garden party were choreographed down to the minute, with each interaction planned to maximize her ability to connect with guests while maintaining appropriate security measures. Robert had memorized every detail of the schedule, including alternative routes and backup plans for various contingencies. As the morning progressed, Robert found his attention repeatedly drawn to the weather conditions. The wind had begun to shift direction subtly, and the temperature seemed to be dropping more than would be expected for the season. His years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts, even when they conflicted with official forecasts or conventional wisdom. A group of school children on a special tour of the castle grounds passed by Robert's position. They're excited, chatter and wide-eyed wonder reminding him why his work mattered. These young people represented the future of the nation. Their ability to experience the majesty and history of the monarchy depended on the security and stability that he, his colleagues, provided. The castle's ancient stones seemed to absorb and reflect the changing atmospheric conditions in ways that modern weather instruments couldn't capture. Robert had noticed this phenomenon many times over his career, and he had learned to read the subtle signs that the building itself provided about approaching weather patterns. Today, those signs were telling him something that the official forecasts were missing. Radio communications increased in frequency as various departments coordinated their final preparations. Sound technicians tested the public address system that would be used for speeches and announcements. Floral arrangers made last-minute adjustments to centerpieces and decorative displays. Security personnel conducted final sweeps of areas that would be accessible to guests. Robert's team of guards had been briefed on their specific assignments for the garden party, and he had confidence in their professionalism and preparedness. Each man had been selected for his experience, reliability, and ability to maintain composure under pressure. They understood that their role extended beyond mere security to include representing the dignity and traditions of the monarchy itself. The afternoon shift change brought fresh personnel to various posts around the castle, and Robert used the opportunity to discuss his weather concerns with his deputy, Sergeant Williams. The younger man listened respectfully to Robert's observations, but seemed more convinced by the official meteorological reports than by his captain's intuitive concerns about atmospheric changes. As evening approached, Robert completed his documentation for the day and prepared his final briefing for the night shift supervisors. Tomorrow would bring one of the most significant events of the year, and every detail needed to be perfect. His reports reflected the thoroughness and attention to detail that had made him one of the most respected guards in the service. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, creating a spectacular backdrop for the castle's silhouette. Robert stood for a moment to appreciate the beauty of the scene, but even in that peaceful moment, he couldn't shake the feeling that the calm evening was deceiving. Something in the air itself seemed to whisper warnings that only his experienced senses could detect. The garden party morning dawned with deceptive tranquility as guests began arriving at Windsor Castle in their finest attire. Ladies wore elegant dresses in pastel colors and elaborate hats adorned with flowers and feathers, while gentlemen appeared in formal morning dress with polished shoes and silk ties. The atmosphere was one of refined celebration, with conversations conducted in hushed, respectful tones befitting the prestigious occasion. Robert Harrison had arrived earlier than usual, his persistent unease about the weather conditions driving him to conduct additional inspections of the security arrangements. The official meteorological reports continued to predict favorable conditions, but his experienced eye detected subtle changes in cloud formations and wind patterns that suggested the possibility of sudden weather deterioration. Margaret Thompson was coordinating the final details of protocol with her usual efficiency and grace. The guest list included ambassadors from 12 countries, leaders of major charitable organizations, and citizens who had been honored for their contributions to their communities. Each guest had been carefully screened and briefed on appropriate etiquette for meeting members of the royal family. The Queen's arrival was scheduled for precisely 11 o'clock. Every aspect of the ceremony had been rehearsed multiple times. Her Majesty would begin with a brief receiving line, then circulate among the guests in predetermined patterns designed to allow maximum interaction while maintaining security protocols. Robert had positioned his guards strategically throughout the gardens to provide protection while remaining as unobtrusive as possible. Catering staff were busy, arranging elaborate displays of traditional British refreshments on tables draped with crisp white linens, cucumber sandwiches, scones with clotted cream and jam, and delicate pastries were presented on tiered silver stands, while uniformed waiters prepared to serve tea from gleaming silver urns. The presentation was flawless, representing the highest standards of hospitality and elegance. The first guests to arrive were early. This was customary for such formal occasions. They gathered in small groups on the carefully manicured lawns, admiring the spectacular flower displays and making polite conversation about the beautiful setting. Many had attended similar events in previous years, but the experience never lost its sense of special significance and historical importance. Robert noticed that the wind had begun to pick up slightly, causing the decorative bunting and flags to flutter more vigorously than they had earlier in the morning. The movement wasn't dramatic enough to cause immediate concern, but it represented a change from the calm conditions that had prevailed at sunrise. He made a mental note to monitor the situation more closely as the event progressed. Children from a local school choir had been invited to perform for the guests, and they were practicing their songs under the guidance of their music teacher. Their young voices carried across the gardens, adding a note of joy and innocence to the formal proceedings. Robert smiled as he watched their earnest preparation, remembering his own children's excitement when they had attended similar events. Years earlier, the royal household staff moved with practiced efficiency, ensuring that every detail met the exacting standards expected for such occasions. Footmen in elaborate livery stood ready to assist guests with directions and refreshments, while housekeepers made final inspections of restroom facilities and other amenities. Their professionalism and attention to detail were legendary throughout the service. Industry security communications revealed no unusual activity or concerns as the guest arrival period continued. Background checks had been completed for all attendees, and perimeter patrols reported normal conditions around the castle grounds. Robert acknowledged these reports but found himself paying increasing attention to the atmospheric conditions that seemed to be evolving more rapidly than the weather forecasts had predicted. The Queen's private secretary conducted a final review of Her Majesty's schedule with Robert and Margaret, ensuring that timing and logistics remained synchronized despite the complexity of the event. Royal events required precise coordination between multiple departments, and even small delays or changes could create cascading effects throughout the carefully planned schedule. Television crews and the BBC were setting up their equipment to provide live coverage of selected portions of the garden party for the viewing public. Their presence added another layer of complexity to security arrangements. Broadcast equipment and camera positions needed to be integrated with protection protocols while maintaining the dignity and privacy appropriate for the occasion. Robert's deputy approached with an updated weather report that showed the possibility of isolated showers developing later in the afternoon. The information was presented as a minor update rather than a significant concern, but Robert felt a chill of apprehension that went beyond what the mild forecast revision would normally warrant. His instincts were telling him that the situation might develop more dramatically than anyone anticipated. Distinguished guests continued to arrive, including several members of Parliament, prominent business leaders, and representatives from major charitable organizations. Their conversations reflected the broad range of interests and concerns that characterized modern British society, from education and healthcare to environmental conservation and international relations. The gardens themselves provided a magnificent backdrop for the gathering, with centuries-old trees offering shade and numerous flower beds creating splashes of color throughout the grounds. Gardeners had worked for weeks to ensure that every plant was in perfect condition, and their efforts had created a living masterpiece that honored both natural beauty and human craftsmanship. Robert conducted another perimeter inspection. That the wind had continued to strengthen, and that the cloud formations on the horizon appeared more substantial than they had earlier. His radio communications with the meteorological service confirmed that conditions were being monitored, but the official assessment remained that any weather changes would be minor and manageable. As the arrival period neared its conclusion, Robert positioned himself at his designated post for the Queen's entrance. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing confident and alert, and his mind focused on the responsibilities that lay ahead. Whatever the weather might bring, he was determined to ensure that this important occasion would proceed with the dignity and security that Her Majesty and her guests deserved. Her Majesty the Queen arrived precisely at 11 o'clock, her presence immediately transforming the already formal gathering into something truly magical. Dressed in a powder blue coat with matching hat adorned with delicate silk flowers, she moved with the grace and dignity that had characterized her decades of public service. The guests fell into respectful silence as she began the traditional receiving line. Greeting each person with genuine warmth and interest, Robert maintained his position with perfect military bearing while keeping constant awareness of both the security situation and the increasingly ominous sky above. The clouds had darkened considerably since the morning, and the wind was now strong enough to require guests to hold on to their hats and adjust their clothing periodically. Despite these signs, the official weather updates continued to suggest only minor precipitation was possible. The Queen's conversations with her guests demonstrated her remarkable ability to make each person feel valued and heard. She spoke knowledgeably about their charitable work, professional achievements, community contributions, having been thoroughly briefed on each attendee's background and accomplishments. Her genuine interest in their lives and work created moments of connection that would be treasured for years to come. Margaret Thompson moved discreetly alongside the royal party, ensuring that the schedule remained on track while making subtle adjustments for the strengthening wind conditions. Her experience had taught her to anticipate potential disruptions and prepare alternatives without creating alarm or drawing attention to developing problems. She exchanged meaningful glances with Robert, both of them aware that the weather situation was becoming more concerning. The school choir began their performance as scheduled, their young voices rising clearly above the increasing wind. They sang traditional British songs with enthusiasm and precision, their innocent joy providing a beautiful counterpoint to the growing atmospheric tension. Several guests wiped away tears as the children's performance reminded them of the importance of preserving traditions and inspiring future generations. Catering staff noticed that the wind was beginning to affect their carefully arranged displays, with napkins and lighter items requiring constant attention to prevent them from being scattered. They worked efficiently to secure loose items and make adjustments that would maintain the elegant presentation while adapting to the changing conditions. Their professionalism ensured that service continued smoothly despite the challenges. Robert's radio crackled with an updated weather alert, indicating that conditions were deteriorating more rapidly than initially forecast. A severe storm system was developing to the west and moving toward their location faster than meteorologists had predicted. The information was concerning, but the event was already well underway, and any significant changes would require careful coordination and clear communication. The Queen continued her scheduled interactions with remarkable composure, even as the strengthening wind began to tug at her clothing and hat. Her decades of experience with outdoor events had prepared her for various weather conditions, and she demonstrated the poise and adaptability that had made her beloved by people around the world. Her calm demeanor helped reassure guests who were beginning to notice the changing atmospheric conditions. Television crews were experiencing increasing difficulties with their equipment as the wind affected their camera stability and audio quality. Their technical staff worked frantically to compensate for the conditions while maintaining their live broadcast schedule. The dramatic sky provided an unexpectedly cinematic backdrop for their coverage. Though they privately hoped the weather would not deteriorate further, a sudden gust of wind strong enough to bend tree branches and scatter flower petals across the lawn served as a clear warning that more severe conditions were approaching. Robert immediately activated his radio to coordinate with security control and request an updated weather assessment. The situation had clearly moved beyond normal fluctuations into territory that required active monitoring and potential contingency planning. Margaret approached Robert with a discreetly concerned expression, her years of protocol experience telling her that they needed to begin considering alternative arrangements. The Queen's safety and comfort were paramount, and while Her Majesty had shown no inclination to curtail the event, it was their responsibility to provide options and recommendations based on developing conditions. Guests were beginning to notice the increasingly dramatic sky, with some pointing toward the horizon where dark clouds were building into towering formations. Conversations began to include comments about the weather, though most attendees continued to maintain the polite demeanor appropriate for the occasion. Many had experience with British weather and were prepared to adapt to changing conditions. The royal household staff demonstrated their legendary efficiency by beginning subtle preparations for potential indoor alternatives. Without creating alarm or disruption, additional umbrellas were positioned strategically around the grounds, and indoor reception areas were quietly prepared to accommodate guests if necessary. Their planning reflected decades of experience with the unpredictable nature of outdoor events. Robert made the decision to position additional guards at strategic locations around the grounds, not because of security threats, but to ensure rapid communication and coordination if weather conditions required immediate action. His team responded with professional efficiency, understanding that their role extended beyond traditional security concerns to include the overall safety and success of the event. The Queen's private secretary maintained constant communication with various departments to monitor the situation and coordinate potential responses. Royal events required exceptional flexibility and preparation. The dignity and safety of all involved could never be compromised. Her calm professionalism helped ensure that contingency planning proceeded smoothly without creating unnecessary anxiety. A particularly strong gust of wind caused several ladies' hats to require immediate attention, and gentlemen stepped forward gallantly to assist in retrieving scattered accessories. The incident created moments of shared laughter and camaraderie among the guests, demonstrating the British ability to maintain good humor in the face of challenging circumstances. Robert felt the first drops of rain beginning to fall as the storm system moved closer to their location. Precipitation was still light, but the darkening sky and increasing wind velocity indicated that more severe conditions were imminent. He knew that decisive action would soon be required, and he began mentally rehearsing the protocols that would ensure everyone's safety while preserving the dignity of the occasion. The transformation from elegant garden party to emergency response situation happened with breathtaking speed. Within minutes, the light drizzle became a steady rain, then suddenly intensified into a torrential downpour accompanied by winds that bent ancient oak trees and sent debris flying across the manicured lawns. Robert's worst fears were being realized as nature unleashed a fury that no one had anticipated. The first crack of thunder startled guests who had been attempting to continue their conversations despite the deteriorating conditions. Lightning illuminated the darkened sky in brilliant flashes, creating an otherworldly atmosphere that transformed the peaceful castle grounds into something resembling a scene from a dramatic film. The storm had arrived without the gradual buildup that usually provided warning and preparation time. Robert immediately activated the emergency protocols that had been developed for severe weather situations. His voice cut through the chaos on the radio as he coordinated with security control to implement rapid evacuation procedures for moving hundreds of guests to safety inside the castle. Every second counted as the storm's intensity continued to increase beyond anything they had experienced in recent memory. Her Majesty the Queen demonstrated remarkable composure as the crisis unfolded around her. Rather than showing concern for her own comfort, she immediately began inquiring about the safety and well-being of her guests, particularly the elderly attendees and the children from the choir. Her calm leadership provided a stabilizing influence that helped prevent panic and maintained order. During the chaotic transition from outdoor celebration to emergency evacuation, Margaret Thompson coordinated with castle staff to open the Great Hall and other large indoor spaces to accommodate the displaced guests. Centuries-old rooms that normally housed priceless artwork and historical artifacts were quickly transformed into temporary refuges, with staff members providing towels and refreshments to guests who had been caught in the sudden deluge. The logistics of moving so many people safely indoors while maintaining the royal protocol presented extraordinary challenges. The catering staff worked heroically to salvage what they could of the elaborate refreshment displays while ensuring that guests continued to receive appropriate hospitality despite the dramatic change in circumstances. Silver urns of tea were hastily relocated to indoor serving stations, and staff members distributed warm beverages to guests who had been soaked by the unexpected storm. Their professionalism under pressure exemplified the highest standards of service. Lightning strikes were now occurring with alarming frequency, some close enough to the castle grounds that the thunder followed almost immediately. Robert made the crucial decision to suspend all outdoor activities completely and ensure that everyone had reached safe indoor locations. His years of military training had prepared him for crisis management, but the responsibility for protecting royalty and hundreds of civilians in a severe storm was unprecedented in his experience. The children from the school choir were among Robert's primary concerns, as their young ages made them particularly vulnerable to both the physical dangers of the storm and the psychological trauma of such a frightening experience. Teachers and castle staff worked together to keep the children calm and entertained while ensuring they remained in the safest possible locations within the massive stone building. Television crews found themselves in the unexpected position of covering a breaking news story rather than a planned ceremonial event. Her live broadcasts captured the dramatic transformation of the garden party and the impressive emergency response coordination. The footage would later become historic documentation of both the storm's sudden arrival and the exemplary crisis management displayed by royal staff and security personnel. Castle maintenance. Staff rushed to secure outdoor equipment and decorations before they could be damaged by the increasingly violent winds. Centuries of experience with severe weather had taught them which areas of the grounds were most vulnerable to storm damage, and they worked efficiently to minimize potential destruction while ensuring their own safety in the hazardous conditions. Robert coordinated with local emergency services to ensure that additional support would be available if needed. The storm's sudden intensity had caught meteorological services by surprise. They were now issuing severe weather warnings for the entire region. Radio communications revealed that similar conditions were affecting areas throughout southern England, making this a significant weather event rather than an isolated incident. Her Majesty insisted on personally checking on various groups of guests who had taken shelter in different parts of the castle. Her presence and concern helped calm anxious visitors while demonstrating the personal qualities that had endeared her to people around the world. Security staff accompanied her on these visits, but her determination to ensure her guests' comfort and safety was clearly her own initiative. The Great Hall, normally used for state banquets and formal ceremonies, was transformed into an impromptu reception area where guests could dry off and warm up while waiting for the storm to pass. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone present. They were experiencing history in the making, as one of the most prestigious social events of the year became an extraordinary test of emergency preparedness and human kindness. Windows throughout the castle rattled from the force of the wind, and occasional power fluctuations reminded everyone of the storm's intensity. Emergency lighting systems activated automatically. Backup generators ensured that essential services remained operational. The castle's ancient construction had weathered countless storms over the centuries, and its solid stone walls provided reassurance to those seeking shelter within. Robert established a command post in the security control room where he could monitor conditions throughout the castle while maintaining communication with emergency services and weather monitoring stations. His calm professionalism under extreme pressure impressed both his own staff and the civilian personnel, who were witnessing his crisis management skills for the first time. As the storm continued to rage outside, Robert began to realize that an event would be remembered not just for the weather emergency, but for the extraordinary response it had generated. The seamless coordination between royal staff, security personnel, and civilian guests demonstrated the values of service, preparation, and community that defined the best of British institutions. The sound of hail striking the castle's ancient windows added another dimension to the storm's assault, creating percussion effects that could be heard throughout the building. Guests gathered near the tall windows to witness the natural spectacle while remaining safely indoors, many commenting that they had never experienced such dramatic weather conditions during a royal event. What happened next would become the stuff of legend among castle staff and guests alike. As the storm reached its peak intensity, Robert made a decision that went far beyond his official duties and demonstrated the kind of leadership that emerges only in moments of true crisis. Rather than simply managing the evacuation, began organizing the displaced guests into a community that would support each other. Through the frightening ordeal, the elderly ambassador from Denmark was struggling with anxiety as the thunder crashed overhead, his memories of wartime bombardments being triggered by the violent sounds. Robert approached him personally, spending precious minutes away from his command responsibilities to sit with the distinguished gentleman and help him process the overwhelming sensory experience. Other guests witnessed this act of compassion and began reaching out to comfort each other in similar ways. Her Majesty, observing Robert's initiative, began her own efforts to transform the crisis into an opportunity for human connection. She moved through the various sheltered groups, engaging in conversations that went deeper than typical royal interactions. Instead of formal pleasantries, she spoke with genuine concern about people's fears, their families who might be worried about them, and their experiences during this unprecedented situation. The school choir children, initially frightened by the dramatic change in circumstances, became the catalyst for one of the most remarkable aspects of the day's events. Robert suggested that they continue their musical program indoors, and their teacher quickly organized an impromptu concert in the Great Hall. Their young voices singing traditional songs in the ancient chamber created a magical moment that helped everyone present feel connected to something larger than their individual fears. Margaret Thompson coordinated with kitchen staff to provide hot soup and warm bread to all the guests, transforming the emergency shelter into something resembling a community feast. The formal catering displays had been replaced by simple comfort food that brought people together around shared tables rather than maintaining the social hierarchies that had characterized the original garden party format. Castle maintenance. Workers, having secured the outdoor areas as much as possible, joined the indoor gathering rather than remaining separate from the distinguished guests. Robert's leadership had created an atmosphere where social barriers dissolved in the face of shared experience, and conversations developed between people who would never have interacted under normal circumstances. The television crews, initially frustrated by the disruption to their planned coverage, realized they were documenting something far more significant than a typical royal event. Their cameras captured genuine human emotions and authentic interactions that revealed the character of both the royal family and the British people in ways that scripted ceremonies never could. The footage would later be studied as an example of crisis leadership and community resilience. As the hours passed and the storm continued its assault on the castle grounds, Robert organized various activities to keep people engaged and distracted from the frightening conditions outside. Guests shared stories about their own experiences with severe weather, creating an informal storytelling circle that revealed fascinating personal histories and created new friendships. Among strangers, emergency services reported that the storm was affecting a much larger area than initially predicted, with transportation networks disrupted throughout the region. This news meant that guests would likely be stranded at the castle for several more hours, but instead of creating additional anxiety, the information seemed to strengthen the sense of shared adventure and community that had developed. Robert coordinated with his security team to establish communication links with guests' families, ensuring that worried relatives could be informed of their safety and current status. This practical consideration demonstrated his understanding that crisis management extended beyond immediate physical safety to include emotional and psychological well-being for everyone involved. The Queen's private secretary worked with castle staff to arrange overnight accommodations for guests who would be unable to travel home due to storm damage and transportation disruptions. Historic bedrooms that had hosted royalty and heads of state for centuries were prepared to provide comfort for ordinary citizens who had become extraordinary through their shared experience of this remarkable day. Her Majesty made the unprecedented decision to invite all the guests to join her for an informal dinner in the castle's dining rooms, abandoning traditional protocol in favor of treating everyone as honored friends who had weathered a crisis together. The gesture would be remembered as one of the most gracious acts of hospitality in modern royal history, demonstrating her genuine care for people who had been placed in harm's way while attending her event. Robert found himself moved to tears as he watched children playing with elderly diplomats, saw business leaders serving soup to charity workers, and witnessed the transformation of a formal social gathering into a genuine community bound together by shared experience and mutual care. His decision to prioritize human connection over strict security protocols had created something beautiful from a potentially traumatic situation. The storm began to show signs of weakening as evening approached, but the bonds that had formed during those intense hours would last much longer than the weather emergency. Guests exchanged contact information and made plans to continue friendships that had been forged in the ancient halls of Windsor Castle during one of the most memorable days in recent royal history. As night fell and the castle's lights created a warm glow against the clearing sky, Robert reflected on how his years of training and experience had prepared him not just to protect people from physical danger, but to help them find strength and joy even in the midst of fear and uncertainty. The morning after the storm revealed a transformed landscape around Windsor Castle. But more significantly, it revealed transformed relationships among the people who had shared that extraordinary experience. Guests who had planned to attend a formal garden party and return to their separate lives found themselves part of an extended family created through shared adversity and mutual support under Robert's compassionate leadership. The physical damage to the castle grounds was substantial, but not devastating. Ancient trees had lost major branches. Flower beds had been scattered by the wind and hail. Temporary structures erected for the garden party lay twisted and broken across the lawns. However, the centuries-old castle itself stood as sturdy as ever, its stone walls having protected all who sheltered within during nature's fierce assault. Her Majesty emerged from the experience with a renewed appreciation for the character of her people and the dedication of her staff. At the informal breakfast she hosted for the remaining guests, she spoke movingly about how the previous day had reminded her why she was proud to serve as their queen. Her words were not the formal speeches typical of royal occasions, but heartfelt expressions of gratitude and admiration. Robert found himself the subject of widespread praise and media attention for his role in transforming a potential disaster into a celebration of human resilience and community spirit. Newspapers across the country carried stories about the royal guard who had shown extraordinary leadership by prioritizing people's emotional needs alongside their physical safety during the crisis. The Danish ambassador, whose wartime memories had been triggered by the storm's violent sounds, sought out Robert before departing to express his gratitude for the personal attention he had received. Their conversation revealed that Robert's grandfather had served in the Danish resistance during World War II, creating an unexpected connection that would lead to a lasting friendship between the two men and their families. Margaret Thompson worked with the Queen's private secretary to document the lessons learned from the emergency response, creating new protocols that would incorporate the community-building approaches that had proven so successful. The formal report they submitted became a model for crisis management in other royal households and government institutions around the world. The school choir children became local celebrities after videos of their impromptu concert in the Great Hall went viral on social media. Their teacher reported that the experience had given them confidence and a sense of connection to history that would influence their education for years to come. Several of the adult guests established a scholarship fund to support music education in their school. Television coverage of the event won multiple journalism awards for its documentation of authentic human responses to crisis and the extraordinary leadership displayed by royal staff and security personnel. The footage became part of historical archives, preserving for future generations a record of how ordinary people could become extraordinary. When faced with challenges requiring courage and compassion, cleanup and restoration of the castle grounds became a community project, as many of the storm guests returned in the following weeks to volunteer their time and resources. Business leaders donated equipment and materials, while others provided labor and expertise. The restoration work created opportunities for continued friendships and demonstrated the lasting impact of their shared experience. Robert received a personal commendation from Her Majesty, but he valued even more highly the letters and visits he received from guests who credited him with helping them discover strength and resilience they didn't know they possessed. His example of servant leadership had inspired others to look for ways they could serve their own communities with similar dedication and compassion. The annual garden party was eventually rescheduled and held successfully, but it could never match the emotional impact and genuine human connections that had been created during the storm day. Many of the original guests attended both events, but they frequently commented that the storm gathering had been the more meaningful of the two. Experiences local emergency services studied the castle's response to develop new approaches for managing large-scale evacuations and extended shelter operations. Robert's integration of psychological support and community building into traditional security protocols became a model for emergency management. Training programs throughout the United Kingdom and beyond. 6 months after the storm, Her Majesty hosted a special reunion dinner for all the guests who had been present during the emergency. The evening featured formal dining in the staterooms, but the atmosphere remained warm and intimate. reflecting the relationships that had been forged during their hours together in crisis. Many guests reported that this reunion was one of their most treasured experiences with the royal family. Robert's career took a new direction as he became involved in training programs for security and emergency personnel, teaching others how to balance safety requirements with human needs during crisis situations. His approach emphasized that protecting people meant more than ensuring their physical security. It required attending to their emotional and spiritual well-being as well. The Storm Day became part of Windsor Castle's unofficial history, with staff members sharing the story with new employees as an example of the values and character that defined service to the crown. Robert's leadership during those critical hours established a standard of excellence that continued to influence how the institution approached its responsibilities to both the royal family and the general public. Years later, when Robert finally retired from active service, guests from the Storm Day attended his farewell ceremony. Their presence demonstrated the lasting impact of his decision to prioritize human connection and community support during a moment of crisis. His legacy extended far beyond traditional security duties to encompass a broader understanding of what it meant to serve others with dignity, compassion, and strength. The fierce storm that had arrived without warning had indeed left everyone speechless, but not because of its destructive power. Instead, people were moved to silence by their memories of how extraordinary leadership and genuine human caring had transformed a frightening emergency into one of the most meaningful experiences of their lives.